Arash Madani along with Tim Micallef on Tim and Sid. Joining us now to discuss how the NHL is going to tackle all of this is Chris Johnston of Hockey Night in Canada and Sportsnet. Chris, welcome back to the show. And first off, how are you, the wife, and the extended family doing?
Everyone's doing great. Happy to report, as good as can be during this time, and just living a quiet life in our condo.
What did Chris Johnston, the Cowboys fan, think of the CD Lamb pick on Thursday night?
I was pumped, man, and based on a lot of the stuff I read afterwards, because I don't pretend to know much about the prospects coming in, is that the Cowboys had a good draft. So this truly must be the end of days if that is in fact the case.
Well,
was
if it
Jerry
is,
making the picks from the yacht? Was that actually happening, or did they have another room somewhere else?
No, I think he was on the yacht. He's in the safest place possible, man.
Right.
Jerry ran for the $250 million yacht and started making his picks as the pandemic hit. Listen, we were talking about this off the top of the show. We were talking about it at the beginning of the second half. There's a lot percolating in the sports world about return dates, about when things are going to reopen in both society and the sports world. What's the latest from the NHL, at least from what you've heard?
Well, I think the reason you're hearing so much, too, is that it's still a pretty fluid situation. And you know, we already saw the NBA go from one Friday to the next Friday to when they're going to start opening their facilities. And so, you know, I think what's happening right now in the NHL is you know, obviously in the moment they're in the same spot they have been since March 12th. You know, the players are being told to isolate. But we're getting to a point where I think the league is hopeful or looking to try to figure out how it can transition into the next phase and you know, open up some team facilities and get players back skating, at least on a larger level than are happening now. The problem the NHL is going to have, and I think it's a little bit distinct from the NBA's, is that, you know, it's hard to do this in a fair manner because, you know, let's face it, we're still at a spot in North America where the governmental guidelines are different everywhere. And, you know, it may not be possible to pick any date in the near future where, you know, all 31 teams would be able to open practice facilities and have players come in small groups to start working out. And so I think the league is deciding or working through how it's going to handle that. You know, we've already heard Gary Bettman say last week in his interview with Ron MacLean that there's no perfect at this point. And so, you know, I would expect at some point they'll go ahead and do this on some kind of staggered basis. And so, you know, that could probably happen somewhere the middle of May or a little bit later. And the hope is to have training camps at some point in June and you know, get back to playing real games by July in the centralized cities. So, you know, that's kind of the time frame everybody's working on. It means pushing next season back to December, you know, maybe even January at some point. You know, I don't think they're contemplating exactly that stage just yet, but I mean, there's going to be a trickle down effect that last year's here. But it's amazing because, you know, so much focus, even my own focus goes on, you know, can they play these games? Where are they going to play them? How's it going to look? And really, they haven't got out of the first stage yet of where they're at since the season went on pause.
So real games, if they come back, means a playoff format, the end of the regular season, or is this all just TBD?
No, I think at this stage it's fair to say that the focus is on trying to complete the regular season. And
it is,
you know, yeah, and the league believes it can do that in 3 weeks. That, you know,
okay,
with having, you know, basically 8 teams apiece and 7 in one place, but you know, having the divisions or something approximating the divisions focused in 4 locations. If you play 3 games a day, that there's a way to rejig the schedule and get it so that every team reaches 82 games. And you know, so that's the preferred method. Now, I think that could still change. I mean, obviously, if they're not able to open facilities, if that training camp can't happen in June, if the league starts working on a narrower time frame, I think that goes out the window. But you know, as of I've last heard, I think that's still the priority. And look, all the individual teams have regional deals of varying degrees, whether it's TV, sponsorship, what have you. I think that there's money to be regained even by playing for some of those teams, even teams that reasonably don't have a chance to win a Stanley Cup. You know, that they'll be made to come back. And you know, but this is all pending. This is all a big what if, of course, you know, with what happens with the government authorities and those types of things.
Chris, is there any way, and Chris Johnston of Hockey Night in Canada joining us here on Tim and Sid with Arash Madani, is there any way that someone on a team, like we've already heard Drew Doughty say, like, we're not playing. Like, have you heard from players or the PA where someone out of the playoffs with no chance of making the playoffs just says, I don't want anything to do with this.
I'm
3
out.
weeks.
Yeah.
Well, Phil Deneau said it today, right, to the Montreal reporters. And I've certainly heard the sentiment expressed privately with some guys. But, where I fall on that is here. I do believe that if the government and the health authorities say it's safe to do so, I think that the Players Association as a whole will be fully on side with the NHL. That is, I don't see any scenario where if this is allowed to go forward, that the players as a whole are going to strike this down or refuse to play. I just think that there's too much reason for them to do it. I mean, yes, it's the money that can be made back for this season, but I think it's also about fan engagement and getting the momentum going into next year. I mean, I think that anyone who's really studied this as much as you can understand that this is for every sports league going to be a multi-year thing in terms of getting back to where you were, in terms of remaining relevant, and it's not going to be easy. And so I think as a whole, the players will play. There's probably ways to satisfy some of those worries. I mean, really from an NHL standpoint, if it goes on the way we're, that it's sort of drawn up in pencil at this point, a team that plays for the Stanley Cup could potentially be, kept away kind of in the bubble for 3 to 4 months. And,
right.
Maybe there's ways that you can address that. Maybe you can at some point bring families into the bubble, once teams are eliminated and space opens up in those hotels. I mean, maybe there are some ways to ease some of those concerns or to ease the burden being placed on players' shoulders. But, other than the fact that obviously not everyone's going to like this, at the end of the day, I think as we come out of this, a lot of people are going to be asked to do things in their jobs that they might not like or, have to take some acceptable level of risk on. I mean, that's just going to be life for all of us, at least until the idea is there that we have some way to be sure we're not going to get this once a vaccine's available. So, it's not to diminish any individual concerns, but I just don't see it getting in the way of the project as a whole.
Look, so much of this, CJ, is hypothetical and brainstorming and throwing out some different ideas. But if an NHL end of a regular season and playoffs goes into the summer, and as you were mentioning, maybe next season starts around Christmas, give or take, are we still looking at an 82-game season next year?
Officially, yes, but I have to believe functionally, no. Because, from what I've talked to some guys who worked for teams in the last few days, they're thinking if it's a start, there's 2 dates that have been bouncing around, and I don't even think they're official, but some think it could be December 15th, give or take, the start of next season for the league. Some think, immediately after Christmas, December 27th, 28th. And, the league would have to hand out the next Stanley Cup, prior to the Tokyo Olympics, because NBC is a major league sponsor, obviously, as the TV partner in the U.S., and the Olympics is NBC's baby. So, that time frame, I think, is probably too condensed, even if you get rid of the All-Star break and the bye weeks and other things to stage 82 games. Someone told me they could see it being 70 games in that kind of scenario if we're looking at a late December startup. But, the reality is the NHL is a very date-driven league, and I don't have the percentage. I heard you talking about it for baseball. I don't know what the actual number is, but I do know it's very contingent upon that. And so a later start, even with fewer games, makes more sense than an earlier start in playing 82. That is, the idea that the later it goes and the possibility being greater that you can maybe have, at least some fans in the building or get to a point where a vaccine could be around that you can start moving towards full arenas again by the end of the next season. I think that it's worth sacrificing some games, versus playing half a season in front of empty buildings. I just don't think for the way the NHL economics work that makes much sense either. So, right. I would guess if things do go off the way they are and they can complete this season in the fall, start in December, you're probably looking at something less than 82 games next year.
Chris Johnston, Hockey Night in Canada, NHL and Sportsnet right here on Tim and Sid. Last one from me, and it's an iteration of the same conversation, but I think it's an important one. Gaetan Haas today, it's not a big deal, but Marco Scandella gets done by the St. Louis Blues. It strikes me that people are doing some business during this quarantine that makes it feel like whatever the salary cap will be next year will be some sort of percentage of where we're at this year, so that they won't be somehow, beholden to the salary cap that would actually come about if you lost the amount of money we're talking about in the NHL. Is that your understanding, that when the salary cap comes out for next year, it won't punish those who are high, like the Toronto Maple Leafs, like the Arizona, like there's a bunch of teams who are in the $70 million range, and that cap could be below it if you factor in how much money you'd lose this year?
Yeah, I think that's how it's going to work. And look, the league and the Players Association haven't reached that agreement. It's probably about one of 182 items, and I'm probably light on that they have to work through, because obviously free agency is going to be pushed back from July 1st this year. It is, but I think functionally everyone understands it's likely that the cap will remain flat for next year and probably the next couple of years. And so there's still an argument there that penalizes the high spending teams, because those teams pre-pandemic were counting on the cap going up by a couple million every year. That's what it's done every year since it was brought about. But, I think from a functional standpoint, it doesn't benefit the teams to see it go down to 50 million, 60 million, 70 million. I mean, because of the contract commitments that are out there. Now, how you handle exactly how much money players get and the escrow taking off their checks, that'll be a separate conversation from where the cap number itself is at. But, I think most teams are operating under the assumption that it's going to be $81.5 million again next season, and probably for a couple seasons beyond that, and just see where those negotiations end up.
CJ, 6 weeks ago, there were some coaches and maybe GMs on the hot seat. Is anyone on the hot seat now if they're going to play some kind of abbreviated whatever, leading into whatever kind of playoffs this may be?
I don't think so. I mean, we did see the Blackhawks fire a president yesterday, kind of out of the blue. Although I don't think that's related at all. I shouldn't say at all to team performance, but I don't think it's specific to team performance. Anyone that was on the hot seat has probably gotten a brief reprieve here, I would think. Gerard Gallant, for example, is interviewed in New Jersey during the pause. I mean, it's not as though all of that kind of talk is quieted, but I think that the teams need to have a true understanding of whether there are going to be games to be played, especially for the kind of teams that might make those changes. Generally, we're talking about teams that aren't in the playoff spot. There's still a scenario where the NHL restarts and there isn't those regular season games. And so maybe teams like the Devils or, what have you are already finished for the year. So, I think everything and most of that kind of talk is on hold. But, if the league does play this summer, I mean, the off season will just be shifted to the fall. And so all the things that typically happen in the off season, I would think will happen again then. And that will probably include some changes in those roles. But I think everyone, for the most part, is safe for the time being.
All right, Chris, we've run out of time, but we always appreciate you joining us, and good luck to your Cowboys whenever we get to this season, okay?
Oh, man, I'm dreaming of all the sports restarting at the same time. That would be unreal.
The cavalcade of sports just just floods us with a sensory overload. Sid and I were talking about that a few weeks back, saying this could be the greatest time for sports when it all comes back, even though there might not be fans in the stands.
Even if it's July and we're all just stuck inside watching on TV.
Yeah, I'll take it. At this point, Absolutely. I'll take a lot. Chris, always good. Thanks for this.
See you, boys.